Everyone, very excited to be with you today. Show you a new video. This one's going to be a deck tech on a new 100 card deck I've been working on. I've been cooking up something in the kitchen and I wanted to share it with you guys. But I might have also found a revelation, the scroll of truth here. After 15 years of searching, does this deck give an indicator that 100 card decks might be better than 50 card decks competitively? Like, is this I'm not joking. I think this might be true. So hear me out. So the influence of this deck traces back to Brian Jones's 9th place list that got placed at Nationals. And so Brian Jones was asking opponents for this trade. He's like, okay, you can get a Possessing Spirit and I can get a Lost Soul. And the way he does that is he puts Possessing Spirit in their territory and then chooses it to block with Simon. And usually people aren't running orange, so Simon has initiative against Possessing Spirit and they can get a Lost Soul pretty easy. It's like a really good attack. And so I was taking note of this and I was taking a look at what Brian was doing. And so he was trying to do this over and over again, not only with Possessing Spirit, but cards like the Sordid Spirit, which can also place in their territory. Because it's in their territory, you can actually choose it as a blocker. And then he has initiative, and so he can play his nice battle winner. So Eternal Inheritance, Authority of Christ, his sacrifice. This is great because it cannot be interrupted by demons. So even if they did have a way to stop it, his sacrifice will say no, no, no. And so another interesting thing Brian was doing, he was running Concealed Riches in his deck and 2 Possessed, Snaring Spirit, and Nazareth in the reserve. And so what he'd do is he'd trade some cards in from his hand, grab these 3 cards, and even if opponents had protection under Herod's Temple, he could go Snaring Spirit, Territory class, regardless of Protect, create 2 evil character tokens and place them on heroes in the opponent's territory. So as long as opponents had heroes he could target, he could get 2 more demons in their territory to choose for Simon. And also, he had a nasty, sneaky Nazareth. So after he's done all his searching, he can slam down a Nazareth and hopefully restrict what the opponent's doing. So that was kind of like his interesting take on a Disciples deck, which I thought was really good. And I've been experimenting with this type of deck, and it's been in the back of my mind. Just like the power of choosing these type of orange characters in people's territories and basically not letting them block in the late game. Secondary influence of this deck was from a Redemption with Jaden video where he was fighting Joe Schaefer and he absolutely got destroyed by a Pride of Lions deck. So this is what happens. Jaden was plodding along, he was doing his thing, and then Joe Schaefer shows up with a Pride of Lions. And so if you don't know what this is, basically Joe Schaefer had a 150 card deck. And I'll get to the deck building rules later on in the video, but basically it allows you to play 3 copies of specific cards. So you have 3 Negev Lions in your deck somewhere, and then you play 1 copy of Pride of Lions. And if you can get to that copy of Pride of Lions and play it in battle, you get to band in 3 Negev Lions into battle. And so opponent must discard a good card from their hand, and you can draw X, limit 3, X's number of lions. So if you can imagine what would happen in a battle, if Joe gets to play this, opponent has to discard 3 good cards from their hand and he gets to draw 9. So like it's a pretty big payoff. It's probably one of the biggest things you can do enhancement wise in Redemption is like draw 9, make opponent discard 3. That's pretty good, right? So some of the takeaways I was getting from that video. So playing enhancements that generate massive resource swings is a great strategy. It's just there are not a lot of those enhancements that exist in the game. So Pride of Lions is one of them, but you have to build your deck in a way where you have to play 150 cards. And so there can be advantages to 100 card decks, 150 card decks. And watching Joe's video or Jaden's video kind of made me think about like, what if there is a viable one out there? Joe Schaefer's list, he himself admitted that it did have a problem getting to Son of God and Second Coming. Naturally, you can only play one of those copies of those cards in your deck. And so if you have 150 card decks, you don't really have a good way of getting to those cards unless you build your deck in a way where that's easily mitigated. So I think getting the Son of God Second Coming is one of the problems that 100 card decks, 150 card decks really have to solve for in order to be viable. Because if, in Redemption, if most opponents are just trying to count to 3 to win the game and then play their Son of God Second Coming, you're going to be at a disadvantage because you're trying to count to 4. Usually you can like draw 1 of your copies of Son of God or Second Coming, but you're basically on paper, it looks like you're just going to be behind because you can't get to your Son of God or Second Coming. So the deck I'm going to be talking about is what if we could combine this Brian Jones choose the blocker strategy with Joe Schaefer's play enhancement, get a big resource swing deck. And so an enhancement that has the potential to do just that is the Ascension, which can interrupt the battle, play a clay hero from reserve. Hero may band any number of New Testament heroes. Cannot be negated if used by a meek hero. So the key phrase here in the Ascension is any number of New Testament heroes. Yeah, most banding enhancements say limit 3, but this one doesn't. And I think if they had to print it again, it would say limit 3. But so hear me out. So like in Magical Christmas Land, let's just imagine we're attacking with Simon. We choose Possessing Spirit to block, and they don't have unity to ban to a gospel character. And so we get initiative. They don't have a way to stop it. So we get to play the Ascension. And then we band in the boys and the girls. So Matthew, band them in, draw a bunch of cards. Woman with Child, go grab a dominant from our deck. Matthias, convert to meek, bounce Possessing Spirit. Resurrection Vila, go take a gospel dominant from deck, and we can get Paul out of our reserve and draw 2 cards. So we just turned 1 enhancement into 2 dominants, at least 4 or 5 cards from Matthew and 2 cards from Paul. So 1 enhancement became like 9 or 10 cards, right? Because Matthias gets to grab a card too. And also because we got Matthias in, we can bounce Possessing Spirit. So Possessing Spirit will go back to our hand, and we can just play him down and attack with Simon again next turn, assuming we have a way to bounce Simon. And if we get to play 2 Ascensions in our deck, we can do this twice, and we can just snowball the game. So that's Magical Christmas Land. If you play 100 card deck, you can play 2 copies of the Ascension and 2 copies of Possessing Spirit. And so you could potentially like pull this off at least or more than once per game. That's like the big strategy. And so where did this deck start? Where did the inspirations for this deck start? How did I get to actually building it? Well, it started in the most unlikely spaces is Nicodemus. I know everyone loves Nicodemus, the evil character, and that's the most play he's seen. Is cannot be negated, gets to draw 2, NT gray enhancements also cannot be negated. I mean, really solid character. But I was reading this guy and it's like, okay, if you have 3 meek New Testament lost souls, you can draw 3 with this guy every turn. CBN, that's great. And you can ban 2 empty tomb heroes. And so I was trying to figure out okay, what kind of deck would this guy go in? He seems like he has great potential, but what kind of shell would support him? So I started here. This is where I started, Nicodemus. So yeah, there's 3 meek lost souls. Okay. He's not good on turn 1, right? Because you have to have lost souls in play. You generally don't have 3 turn 1. So if he's not good on turn 1, then why play him? Well, maybe he could be good on turn 1. If you go Harvest Time, you can play all the lost souls from your deck, at least 3, right? And you also get to play Resurrection, which can place empty tomb heroes, and Nicodemus has the empty tomb identifier, so we can grab Nicodemus with the Resurrection, and he bans any empty tomb hero. So if we have a giant turn where we're trying to play Resurrection and we're banding a Nicodemus can come in and he can then ban to Resurrection Revealer and go grab a Gospel Dominant. So it has really potential to be explosive, this Nicodemus guy. So here are the cards. I'm like, okay, how do I take these cool synergies and then how do I build a deck around this that works? And so actually I've been able to go back and look at my YouTube videos, and it's cool because I now have a collection of spice I have up on my cooking shelf, so to say, if we're using a cooking analogy. So I made a deck tech called Saucy Tossy, and the motto was toss everything. And the deck was just built around playing Herod's Temple and activate every turn on offense or defense. And no enhancements, just saucy tossy, just everything's tossed. And a core concept in that deck was getting out Herod's Temple early and then getting out the first and putting that into play. So what this does is say if you have, a couple lost souls out that are meek, and then you get to play the first, you get to trigger the first, and you get to draw a card and top deck it, and then you go into battle. And then let's say you're banding in 3 heroes into battle. Okay, great. Well, Herod's Temple says nothing about when you can activate it or not. You may reserve the top card of your deck during battle to toss all enhancements played while your NT human is alone in that battle. So even though you have 3 characters in battle, you can still activate this. So you start activating it, right? The first activation comes, I'll put the first into play. The first will be like, okay, I'm going to trigger my ability. You get to draw a card, put it on top of your deck. And so it creates a little loop. This loop is only stopped by the 4 activations limit. So you can only activate the first 4 times. But long story short, if you have Herod's Temple, some meeks in the first out, during each attack or block, you can draw 4 cards on top of everything else you're doing, which is, that's just really good. And because it's always going on the top of your deck, your opponent can't Son of God the first. So it's kind of hard to break up unless they negate Herod's Temple or negate your neutrals. but there's plenty of negates running around, so you can't build a whole deck around this. It's pretty fragile. But this is like another layer of like, okay, so here's Nicodemus, here's all these pieces. Okay, here's some more pieces. How can we make this fit? And then, well, if you're playing Meeks, well, the dark side says to bury them. So that reminded me of another combo deck that I'd worked on, where I first kind of toyed around with the idea of like, what if you got Harvest Time, and then you put all your Meeks in play, and then you play Burial, and you put all the Meek Lost Souls underneath your deck. And in theory, it's like a good strategy, right? Because if you have deck protection, you can make sure the opponent doesn't shuffle your deck or search a Lost Soul out of your deck. And if most people are running Soul Gen in the form of Lost Souls, when you play Harvest Time, you just put all their Soul Gen into play. And so in theory, it's like a good way to like lock people out of the game. And in that video, I was kind of tinkering around with 50 card versions of the deck and then 100 card versions of the deck. Because at 50 cards, you're drawing through your deck, trying to get to your combo. You go for the combo, you underdeck everything, and by that time, you only have like a thin margin. So like, let's say you have like, I don't know, 8 cards between that are on the top of your deck, and then the bottom of your deck is just Lost Souls. And so that's like not a very easy margin to work with if you're trying to stall the game out. You know, you want to be able to keep drawing gas, and 8 or 9 cards is like pretty not a lot to work with. So I was like, okay, what if there was a 100 card version? Because in theory you could get to your combo and then put all the Lost Souls on the bottom, and then you'll have like a 30 card 60 card margin instead of like an 8 one. So you have way more time. So you basically lock the opponent out. If there's no way they can get out of that. And so this video was exploring if this was a gimmick or if this was actually a good idea. So I'm like, okay, so I have this Burial combo deck. Let's see if we can kind of bake that in too. Yeah, long story short, more cards in deck, the more time I have to stall. So that's why we first started experimenting with 100 card decks here. When your deck only has 50 cards, we just need more. Okay, so what would the 100 card version of this deck look like? So when we're building 100 card decks, we need to be aware of this rule. Here's some deck building rules for 100 card decks. So at 100 cards, you can play 14 Lost Souls and 14 Dominance, which is pretty much just double the number of Lost Souls and Dominance you can play in 50 cards. So here are the restrictions. You can't play more than one of non-Meek Lost Souls. So like, you can't play 2 Prosperities, can't play 2 Doles or whatever. You can't play more than 1 Dominance. So you can't play more than 1 Son of God, more than 1 Christian Martyr. And you can't play more than 1 of a specific multicolored card. The definition of multicolored here for this restriction is at face value, does it have more than 1 brigade? So you can play 2 copies of single brigade characters and enhancements, artifacts, and fortresses. And maybe there's, sites or whatever, single brigade sites or whatever. So those are restrictions. And so these are the restrictions. What does that actually look like when building a deck, and what are the trade-offs? Okay, so talk about the disadvantages of that. Like I said earlier with Joe Schaefer's list, like if you're playing more cards, you're going to have less chance of getting to Son of God or Second Coming. It's just a hard task to do. You also have a lower chance of drawing your best cards. Like Lost Souls are some of the best cards in the game right now. Same with the Dominance, same with all these multicolored cards. These cards are the best cards in the game, generally speaking. And so by automatically playing 100 card decks, you're just having a lower chance of getting to them because you can only play 1, and the ratio of 1 to 100 and 1 to 50 is like really different. 100 card decks, you also have a higher chance of drawing heirs. So what does that mean? When you're playing a bunch of duplicates in your deck, for example, if I decide to play 2 of these specific artifact, I can only have one of those active at this one time. So let's say I have 1 in play, and then I go to draw 3 cards for turn, and one of them is that artifact. That's basically just drawing dead cards, dead air. And sure, if the opponent removes that artifact, it'll be nice to have a backup, but generally speaking, you can, if you're building these 100 card decks, there's a risk of drawing cards that don't do anything. Or if you have like a unique hero in play and you draw another one, you're like, okay, great, I have 2 of these heroes, I can only use one of them. So with a 100 card deck, you also have higher variance. Imagine, for example, it's possible to draw, if you draw your opening 8, it's now possible to draw 14 Lost Souls. And you just have higher variance of like, okay, great, I could draw all my Dominance, I could draw, on average, the numbers still work out, but the variance is just different with 100 card decks. And so something that you're trying to do with 100 card decks, we'll get to on the advantages part, but generally to kind of solve these problems, you're trying to play a bunch of searching cards and tutoring cards. Like, for example, getting the Son of God and Second Coming is hard. Well, what if we play cards that searched for these cards? Okay, great. So that kind of strategy progression in playing 100 card decks naturally makes it weaker to Nazareth. And Nazareth is a card that restricts searching. So if you're playing a bunch of cards that do searching and the opponent plays a Nazareth on turn turn one, you're really going to be at a disadvantage there. Okay, that's enough about the disadvantages. What about the advantages? Well, what you can do is you can double up on the best single brigade characters enhancements. So for example, like we're talking about the Ascension, we really want to make that card great. We really want to take advantage of that card. So we can play 2 copies of that card. Or Possessing Spirit, we can get 2 of those. Increased resilience. So if you have a key character in your deck, or Fortress, and the opponent gets rid of it, in your 50 card deck, that's it. There's not really great ways to get those cards back. But in 100 card decks, you can say, okay, no big deal, I'll just go get my other one. And as a result, you can really play the long game. The longer the game goes on, the higher the chances that you're going to win, because you're working with double the resources they can. By the time, they draw to the bottom of their deck, you're still going to have 50 cards left in your deck. You can keep going. You're like Rocky, you can go to round 9. And if you build your deck with cards that search, your overall deck can become more powerful because you can start packing in specific cards that are good in specific scenarios, and your deck becomes like a toolbox of sorts. Whereas in a 50 card deck, you might not have room to carry your wrench, your screwdriver, and your pitchfork, but in the 100 card deck, you can have a whole James Bond suite of answers for any given situation. So as long as you're playing search cards, then in theory, you'll be able to answer more scenarios than 50 card decks. And as a result, the deck's overall power level is going to be higher than your average 50 card deck. I'm saying that in the sense that it's capable of powerful and crazy things, but the question is how fast and how consistently can it execute that game plan? And I think for most 150 card decks, like the answer is it's like, okay, well, it has a powerful thing like Joe Schaefer's deck. It's capable of like doing some crazy things, but how fast and how consistently can you execute that against 50 card decks? 50 card decks are going to be way more consistent, way faster usually. So I think up until now, I think most of these 100 card decks have been dismissed. And so when thinking about building 100 card decks, you have to really think about how can we mitigate the weaknesses inherent in the strategy. Okay, so let's talk about the Son of God Second Coming part, because if we don't get that part addressed, then I don't think we can move on. So okay, so you can get to these. Doesn't have to be hard. You can build a deck that can be consistent at getting the Son of God Second Coming, even more so than like a normal 50 card deck. So for example, if you're playing New Covenant, you can go get your Spirit as Dove, play it on your meat character, go get a New Testament card from your deck. Boom. You just like doubled your copies of Son of God Second Coming in your deck. Or in addition to, you can also run Woman with Child. Attack with him. You're at 3 lost souls. Okay, great. Or 4 lost souls. Attack with Woman with Child, grab Son of God Second Coming, and win the game. And then if you're running Angel of the Winds, you can exchange in a deck with Woman with Child. So you're like, there are ways to get to Son of God Second Coming, and you can build your deck in a way where you can do that consistently when you need to. And so you're not counting to 4 when opponents are counting to 3. Okay, so let's address one of the concerns people may have. It's like, okay, well, these 150 card decks are less consistent because you have a lower chance of drawing your best cards. Like Matthew, you can only play 1 Matthew in your 100 card deck because he's 2 brigades at face value. So let's consider a typical Matthew deck where they have Matthew plus 7 or 6 other ways to get to him on turn 1. So if we're thinking they have 8 lost souls, one of them is Hopper. So they would have 7 out of 42 of their cards in their deck be cards that can get to Matthew. And so the chances of getting to Matthew, given that you have 8 cards in your hand, works to about 80%. So about 80% of the time, if you're a Matthew deck, you can get to your Matthew. Okay, so that's like the baseline. Can 100 card decks, get to the same consistency? Well, yeah, I think so. You just have to make some sacrifices and make some concessions. So yeah, you can only play 1 Matthew. You can only play 1 Patmos. Great. But you can play double up on the New Covenants, double up on Spirit as a Dove, double up on Angelic Guidance, which gets silver heroes, double up on Angel of the Winds, your angels, and then you can play Crowd's Choice, of course. And so 15. So if let's say we're playing a 100 card deck and then you play 14 Lost Souls, and then we have 15 cards, 15 out of 86, that's around 80%. So is it truly less consistent? I don't think so. So myth busted. I don't think 100 card decks have to be less consistent than 50 card ones. The ratios can still work out if you dedicate enough slots to it. Okay, let's talk about the limitation or inherent flaw in 100 card decks. You have a higher chance of drawing air. One of the ways to do that, to mitigate that, is to limit the doubling up. So heroes, if you doubled up every single hero, you'd be drawing a lot of dead space. But if you can find a way to, find different heroes that kind of do the same thing, then each one won't be a dead card if you already have one in play. So perfect candidates for this are Disciples and the Meek White Heroes. You're already limited to playing one of these in your deck anyways, because both of them on face value have more than one brigade. And so this kind of constrains you naturally in a good way to not really double up on your heroes. So it's like, okay, for this Joanna, I know she's really good, and maybe in a world where there wasn't that constraint, I would consider running two of them, but well, we can just do Joanna and like Lazarus and Mary and John and Simon and Thaddeus and all the other disciples too. So that's one way to mitigate drawing error, and just be very kind of selective with what you are doubling up on. Cards that are generic, you can have two of them in play. So I don't feel bad at all about doubling up on Angel from the Sun, because I can have both of them in play. Or Resurrection Reveal. This is a card that you want multiple effects of, and even though you're doubling up on that, it's actually a good thing. Or on defense, you can feel free to double up on cards that are probably going to die really fast. So Woman of the Bez, like she's either going to die right away, or she's going to be given away to your opponent. Or Deceiver, it's always going to get exchanged out of your hand into your reserve or your deck. Or Annis, he's just going to block and chump and die. And then know what you need. If you have concerns that you're just drawing too much air, maybe there is too much air in your list. And so when testing this deck, originally I had Victorious Beings in there and Priest of Christ, but late game, these cards don't really do anything. And sure, they can help you pop off turn one, but I just felt like I didn't need them. So we can, if there is too much air in the deck, maybe let some air out of the tires, so to say. Another way you can mitigate that drawing of garbage cards is having a backup plan for that. So in this deck, we're going to go with Brian Jones's Concealed Riches technology, which allows you to exchange cards in your hand that are dead with cards in your reserve that are gas. So that's one way to deal with it. I'm not playing Mayhem or Iron Crater in this deck, but maybe if you have an idea for a 100 card deck and you wanted to try and hedge for this situation more, you could run cards that basically take the cards you have in your hand, put them away, and then draw new cards. So, but I think Concealed Riches is the better effect of these options. So you have a higher chance of drawing air, that is true, but you can mitigate that if you make some deck building concessions. And yeah, let's talk about the Nazareth problem. So you saw how many cards I was playing that were doing searching, just so I could try to consistently get to Matthew. And so if opponent's going first and they play Nazareth, this is your face. It's not going to be a fun time with this 100 card deck, because now you're like, okay, where's my Three Woes? Oh, I have a 1 in 86 chance of drawing it right now. So if you're playing 100 card deck, I think you also need to build in answers to Nazareth. You need to build your deck in a way where you can fight out of it eventually. So yeah, having a deck is so dependent on Nazareth does mean facing down Nazareth is a huge problem. So look, for example, that this list I'm going to show you has all these dead cards. All these cards are literally dead if the opponent has Nazareth in play. Look at all these beautiful searching. These are the cards that enable a consistency. This is what opens up the toolbox of 100 card decks. So we have 32, around 86 of our cards, or aka 37% of our cards worthless. And that's just not great. Can't win a game. 37% of your cards are not working. Okay, so but we can play outs. Here are the outs of the deck that I'm playing. So I have around 7 of them. So about 8% of our deck is answers. And let's look at the probability of getting to those answers given drawing a certain number of cards. Okay, so here's 8. So given that maybe we've drawn 8 cards, there's about a 50% chance of drawing at least one answer to Nazareth. And then let's say we draw 3 cards for the turn, go up to 11. So if we go to 11 cards, now the chances of us drawing at least one out to Nazareth has gone up to around 62%. And as the game goes on and you draw more cards, the probability of getting at least one out to Nazareth goes up over time. So I don't know, is that good? 50% of the time I can expect to have an answer to Nazareth. I'm going second. That seems decent. And 50% of the time I'm going to be winning the die roll. And when I win the die roll and they don't have a Nazareth in play, I can go really big and draw a lot of cards. So the probability of me drawing an out to Nazareth if I go first, it's probably around 80% by the time, because if I go first, I can draw maybe 6 or 7 cards by the time I reach my second turn. So I don't know, it seems pretty good. So if you're really scared of Nazareth, we can also consider adding more slots to fight it. So for example, Shipwreck is another great candidate for the deck because it deals with Nazareth. So what would adding another answer in going from 7 to 8? So that changes us from about 8% cards to our answers to around 9%. All right, so the blue line is what it looks like currently if you have 7, and the red line is 8 answers. And so you're moving up percentage points. So for example, if you have 8 cards, you're probably probably looking around 55% as opposed to 50%. Or once you get to 11, you're probably looking around 64% compared to 62% or whatever. So it does increase your probabilities, whatever, but not in like a really dramatic way. Long story short, Nazareth is the worst matchup. Turbo Nazareth decks, like the one See the Tree just put out ones with he calls it Purple Heart. He's just really trying to get a Nazareth in the play on turn 1. So those are this deck's worst matchup. There's no two ways about it. But it is workable. It's doable. This deck, you can go behind early, but it can come back really fast. If you land a big Ascension, you can catch up in cards and have really great blocks. And yeah, so I don't think it's unwinnable by any means. Another problem for this deck is decks that are trying to turbo out Moses or Salty. It's not as problematic as Nazareth decks, but if you can't use your territory class enhancements, it's not going to be fun. Not as going to be fun as as if these cards weren't around. So you have more answers to Salty or Moses than you do Nazareth, because you can go Son of God, you can do your characters are still working, so your characters can tutor for answers to Moses. So anyways, well, let's continue talking about the strategy of the deck, and let's talk about some problems with Simon. Simon the Zealous can come in, choose a blocker, and one of the biggest things he runs into are dominant blocks. So he's usually alone in battle, and before he can play anything, opponents can Christian Martyr, falling away him. And Christian Martyr falling away, I've really seen a lot of play right now. So Simon is weak to that. And historically, that's been a way I've used in my decks to try and fight Simon. But modern problems require modern solutions. There is the known tech of Book of the Covenant, grabbing You Will Remain out of the reserve. And if opponent does remove your Simon, you can just get rid of You Will Remain and add a new disciple to battle and continue, pick up where you left off. Another one is Fishing Boat. You can load up the fishing boat with disciples, and if opponent does blow up your lone disciple, you can add another one fit in the fishing boat there once per battle, once per turn. And here's another one that I found. So I do have Simon in the reserve as a package. So I can go Concealed Riches, discard this, exchange 3 cards in my hand, 3 or 4 cards in my hand with these cards. So I can go Simon, the Ascension, Possessing Spirit, set up my big combo. And I can also grab Root of Jesse, and I can play it as my territory class card for turn. So it says, you banish this card to protect meek heroes from opponents this turn. And so if I'm pushing with meek Simon, he's protected from opponents and it can't be negated. Like, they have to have regardless of protection cards to stop that. That is really hard to do. They can't Christian Martyr, they can't Falling Away, they can't Grapes of Wrath, the blocker. It's just really, really strong. So in order to mitigate the weaknesses of Simon, we're running Root of Jesse, Fishing Boat, and Book of the Covenant. So really trying to make sure he's not going to be able to get wrecked. Okay, so what if your opponent is running a gospel defense? Possessing Spirit says Unity, evil characters, gospel. So he's only going to be working if the person in battle who's currently controlling him has all their evil characters are gospel. And so, for example, against defenses like Thieves and Herods, if you attacked with Simon and just chose Possessing Spirit to block, they could just band to their Herods or their Thieves, and that's a problem. There are some really nasty Herods and some really nasty Thieves. So how do you kind of mitigate that? How do you get around that? Well, you can go Gabriel, Mouth of God, negate a evil card, so negate the Possessing Spirit, and then ban Simon, choose it as a blocker. You won't get initiative in that sense, but you do get a clean attack. Or you can alternatively block with your one with the Bez, give it to your opponent, and then attack with Simon, choose it as a blocker. And if the opponent isn't running black, you're going to get initiative. Or if the opponent isn't running their own Canaanites in territory, you're going to get initiative. So these cards if you're playing gospel defense, it is a little bit harder to set up Simon, but it's not impossible. Or here's another scenario. So let's say your opponent does have a Christian Martyr Falling Away, and you know about it, but here's what you do. If you have awesome things in the Ascension, you can attack with Simon, choose a blocker, and then before they have dominant initiative, you get to play your dominant. So you can play awesome things, play enhancement on your meek hero. So you don't have to wait for initiative, basically. And then you play your Ascension, ban to all your heroes. And their Christian Martyr and Falling Away is going to look really silly, and this is the face they're going to be making. Everything's fine, but secretly, this is not fine. Okay, here's another problem. There is a problem with Simon the Zealous, and he's very vulnerable to cards that prevent or negate his ability. So if opponent has a Holy of Holies out, Confusion of Mind, that is going to be a problem for this deck. We won't be able to choose our blocker, and if we're trying to play the Ascension to get a bunch of value, none of our characters work, then the Ascension in our deck is just kind of, what's the point? Here are my answers to these cards. Well, what we can do is we can play Lost Child Found and bounce them before we attack, and then, hey, we're good. So admittedly, these are quote-unquote answers. Like in decks that run Holy of Holies, they're going to be running Glory of the Lord, which will protect them from me. So I won't be able to bounce that. So it's not really an answer in that deck. But bouncing Confusion of Mind, that does work. And the thought is, if I can just get like one really good Ascension attack, that's what I need. And so even though they can play it down next turn, I'll already have gotten the leverage I need to win the game. But there are better answers, and if you want to play them, you can. Brian Jones is running Bethlehem. If you play as a fortress or a site, it says your Ruth and Luke heroes cannot be prevented. So guess who are Luke heroes? You got your best heroes in the deck. Simon, Matthew, Judas, and Joanna are all Luke heroes. So giving Matthew CBP, Simon CBP, like, yeah. The reason I'm not running this is it's so narrow. I just if you're not running Confusion of Mind or Holy Holies, these are just dead cards in your deck. I mean, sure, one dead card out of 100 isn't bad. I could see an argument for it, but I'm just really hesitant to add it, and the reserve list space is so tight. Another answer to either of these is Chronicles. You can negate and discard all the temple artifacts or curses, and this even works against Holy of Holies decks that are playing Glory of the Lord. Because what you can do is you can play your Lost Child Found, bounce their glory, and before they can play it back down again, you can go Chronicles and blow up all their artifacts because they won't be protected anymore. But there's not enough space, in my opinion. Chronicles is only really good against, really helps you out in those matchups. And I don't think those decks are running around it in enough prevalence or strength to even consider putting these cards in the main deck. I mean, maybe the metagame adapts, and this is what happens, and here's how you can adapt too. All right, so what are we going to be running for defense for this deck? It is 26 cards. About 30% of your deck is defense. One out of every 3, approximately. And it's going to be a black-based Soulhide defense. We got Annis the Elder. You can block and underdeck Lost Souls. Really good on turn 1 if you draw maybe 1 or 2 Meek Lost Souls in play. An opponent, usually they're searching on turn 1. So if you block with him, they're searched, he cannot be negated. So really good turn 1 block. Brood of Vipers, useful as an out to Nazareth or Guardians from Glory or Moses. He's just a utility card. Having access to this type of effect that underdecks good cards and territories is really key for this deck. So that's why I'm also playing 2 Goliath Curses, which underdeck good cards and territories as artifacts. Deceiver, just really flexible. I can get to my woman if the Bez early, Annis the Elder on turn 1. Outsiders if I need to, or in the late game I can go HoH CoM the Timonite. The reason I have Glory of the Lord in the defense is because if you play Glory of the Lord and block with Deceiver to HoH CoM, you're going to discard all cards in battle, and there are no enhancements that they can use to stop that. So it's a really good block. One with the Bez, I think I could wax poetic about how good she is. She sets up your Simon, really good on turn 1 if opponents don't have answers. Plotting Priests, you can play them out. It's territory class, and in the early game, they can discourage people from searching. If opponent uses a search ability, they get to underdeck a Meek Lost Soul. And if they block, they can take a New Testament enhancement from your deck. So you can go grab just a Hireling, and if you have initiative, you can shuffle all your Lost Souls, great. Or Surreptitious Scheme, and if you have initiative, you can go grab one of your powerful dominants. Outsiders, really crucial card in this deck. I was playing a version of this deck without Outsiders, and after adding Outsiders in, it just felt a lot better. Because a lot of times opponents are pushing like Lazarus type attacks where they're negating all evil cards, like a lot of your defense just doesn't work. So having the ability to go Deceiver into Outsiders, draw 4 cards, even if you're ahead, like that's still great. So Outsiders really good if you're behind too. If you couple that with Herod's Temple, you can do the Herod's Temple toss and block with Outsiders and underdeck their attacker, and they don't get to do anything about that. So just another scary block that this deck has. Also has some really good dominant blocks. You know, you can just chump with Plotting Priests. Okay, whatever. They negate his search ability. You can just Grapes of Wrath him, reset the battle if you're behind. Or if they do like Simon, choose your character to block, you can just Grapes the blocker and then make him re-attack. Glory of the Lord's also really good in this deck. If opponent is trying to rely on Glory of the Lord to win the battle, you can just keep blocking with Annis and Plotting Priests. Both of those guys are priests. And so Glory of the Lord only lets people who are lone priests in battle from playing. So they try to, I've had opponents just attack and block with Plotting Priests and they Glory of the Lord, and they're like, oh, oops. So Glory of the Lord's really good. Christian Martyr, solid. You can double up with Christian Martyr and Falling Away. And so if you're drawing a bunch of cards and your opponent's best attacks are just these lone heroes in battle, you can just have these strong dominant blocks. And Led Astray Stray. Sorry, a little hard to read there, but it says Unity, Lost Souls Meek, withdraw all rescuing heroes except Meek heroes. So pretty much against any other deck that's not Disciples or some Meek hero deck, this becomes a I win the battle, and there's nothing you can do about it. So against a lot of decks, you get to pack Christian Martyr, Led Astray, Falling Away. And if you're just drawing a bunch of cards and getting to these cards early and often, you have some really strong blocks. Burial, we've already kind of talked about it, but the idea is if you get a Harvest Time and you get a bunch of Lost Souls into play, you can underdeck them all and try to protect your deck from getting shuffled or look through. This is like a late game lockout strategy. So yeah, that's the defense. You can use Golgotha to go grab Gospel blockers if you want to on turn 1 or whatever. So what are the chances of whiffing or getting at least one evil character on turn 1 with this deck? So I know it's not a lot of evil characters. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Like 10 evil characters. That's how often, or that's as much as some decks I'm seeing, 50 card decks. So let's do the math. So if there are 10 evil characters in 86 cards, what are the probabilities of drawing at least one of them in 8 cards? That's around 62%. And if we go second, that goes around to 75%, I would say. So yeah, oftentimes if you're going second, the opponent attacks around 40% of the time, you're not gonna have a block. And that's a dynamic of this deck. And I don't think it's something to be really discouraged about, because once this deck gets going, you can really start getting those good blocks. So yeah, as the game goes on, you'll have a better chance of getting to a blocker and it'll be fine. Trust me. Okay, let's look at the offense. It has a lot more cards than the defense. There are a lot of slots dedicated to artifacts, like Temple Veil to check out and scope their hand, Great White Throne to find more heroes, Book of the Covenant to grab my key covenants from my reserve, 4 Drachma Coin to give me some speed, New Covenant for consistency, and all these battle dominance, Angel of the Lord, Glory of the Lord. The reason I put Falling Away in the offense list is oftentimes I can Falling Away their hero and then choose it as a blocker. Ride on Victoriously allows you to play stuff without initiative, and Resurrection just being really solid. You get to play a bunch of fortresses. I'm playing a bunch of deck and hand protection fortresses to help the Burial game plan. You can really stack these fortresses protect effects if you're drawing enough cards, and that's really hard for most decks to deal with. You're doubling up on Herod's Temple here. It's such a key card in this deck. Basically, if you draw Herod's Temple in Harvest Time in your opening hand, every attack you do for the rest of the game can net you 4 extra cards, because you can Harvest Time into first, basically. Ooh, losing my voice because I'm talking so much about this deck, but have a lot of consistency pieces, Angelic Guidances, Spirit as a Dove, Life Through Christ, Lost Child Found. And then you have some battle winners in the main deck. Love One Another, really solid. Authority Christ, CBN battle winner. And then probably the second best battle winner outside of Ascension or Authority is probably Untouchables. Sometimes you just do the star ability. You get to draw 2 cards randomly. Feels really great. Or if you're attacking the lone hero and you're trying to toss somebody down, having access to 2 of these in your deck is really strong. You can toss down anybody. Moving on to the heroes, you have a suite of Disciples and a bunch of cards that can convert to Meek to do things. So these are the best ones out there. They're all hand-picked, and you can start layering territory class effects like Judas plus Akeem plus Thomas plus Resurrection Revealer, double negate your neutrals. Every time you search, I get a dominant. Every time you draw, I get to steal a card from your hand. Or Joseph, every time you search, I get to bounce somebody. Joseph's like a backup choose the blocker plan. If I can't get to Simon, I can always go choose the blocker. He's an 8/3, so he's really good at getting initiative. So yeah, that's the offense. So let's look at the probability of getting a turn 1 Resurrection or Matthew with this deck. So the way I calculated that, I was I counted up all the cards that could get to Resurrection on turn 1, which is Woman with Child, Angel of the Winds to Woman of Child, or Resurrection Revealer. And then all the ways I can get to Matthew, Spirit as a Dove, New Covenant, Angelic Guidance, these angels, Matthew. So the probability of getting one of these, at least one of these, is if you have 8 cards, that's around 90%. Or if you have 11 cards, that means if you're going second, you have probably 95% chance of doing that. So that's really high. Getting to Resurrection on turn 1 or Matthew on turn 1 with 95% chance, it's pretty good. It's pretty good. And so if this deck has looked interesting to you, I do have some gameplay coming. I've been piloting this deck in the Lackey Grand Prix, and so I actually made it to the finals with this deck. So I'll give you a feature match there, quarterfinals of how this deck did, and also some pickup games with this deck, just to show you how it runs, what it's capable of. I'll let you be the judge of if 100 card decks are going to be the future. So thanks for listening to me yap for around 45 minutes, but I'll see you around next time.